9:30, December 3rd, here in beautiful downtown Boonville, Missouri. It is cold. I've got my little heater on so I can not freeze my lips. It's pretty cold here, and getting ready to rain. So we spent a couple of days on lipid panels. And you know, I've told you that inflammation and oxidative stress or reactive oxygen radicals or species are behind heart disease. So all those little particles that we talk about, the lipoproteins, the LDLs that can get under the endothelial surface, that all starts because of immune response and inflammation. So not all inflammation is bad. You need some of it. So we're going to review some stuff on inflammation, and then we're going to talk about turmeric or curcumin, which is a very well studied supplement for its anti-inflammatory properties. But it does more than that. So I've got 10 little things we're going to talk about that curcumin actually does. So first off, we're going to talk about a review of inflammation and chronic inflammation specifically. So 10 key points about that. So really, you cannot not have inflammation. You have to have some inflammation in your body. It's a primary defensive mechanism, but it can be overexpressed, and we're seeing that with this pandemic, is overexpression of the immune response, natural killer cells, and basically total body inflammation. So that can be harmful, and in fact can kill you. But if it's not, and that's an acute inflammatory response. However, if you have an inflammatory response that is asymptomatic-ish or chronic, and you don't quite, it's not that you're having swelling and redness and pain and all that. One of the markers of chronic inflammation is chronic fatigue syndrome, and if you call that a syndrome, that's fibromyalgia. So chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia are basically the same thing. So if you have chronic inflammation, your body can no longer control the response to the inflammation, its own response, so it becomes serious. And so here's some essential facts on chronic inflammation. So it's a natural and beneficial process. So if you have a mechanical inflammatory response to an injury or a wound, or a microbial response to an infection, and sometimes you can have autoimmune responses where your body actually attacks itself. So autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. Good morning, Linda. So we should be, can you still not hear me, Linda? So we're on the webcam, so hopefully you can hear me. Linda's saying she can't hear me. So I'm going to move up a little bit to the microphone. So let me ask her, since she's on here. Better, oh, okay. So I'm just probably not speaking loud enough. So I moved up closer to the camera and the microphone. Okay, so anyway, inflammation can be natural, it can be beneficial. However, if it's chronic or it's autoimmune, sometimes it can lead to disease, right? So what's the normal mechanism? So when the body's under attack, you get a chemical signal that's transmitted, blood vessels dilate, they allow immune cells to be carried to the area that's under attack, and it's these cells which actively combat the source of an attack. So that response produces the symptoms of redness and heat and swelling and pain, sometimes a pulsing sensation or throbbing. So that's basically an immune reaction. So excessive inflammation has several possible causes. So if it's ongoing, so too is the inflammatory response. So it may be an external factor such as too much alcohol consumption or smoking, air pollution, etc., or bacteria, tuberculosis, any of the chronic inflammatory diseases. I picked on tuberculosis because it used to be so common. My dad actually had tuberculosis and wound up in a tubercular hospital, they called them back in the 40s. So you can also have genetic predisposition to inflammatory disease. The example that's put forth is ankylosing spondylitis. There's autoimmune diseases like systemic lupus and psoriasis and multiple sclerosis where there's chronic inflammation. And obesity and metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes is a form of inflammatory response. So you have a combination of cardiac risk factors with that, specifically hypertension, high cholesterol. We've talked about that the last 2 days. Ratios are more important. High blood sugar levels, and sugar basically rots you from the inside out. Chronic stress can do that. Sedentary lifestyle, if you're not moving at all, you're setting up a chronic inflammatory response. There's also a link between chronic inflammation and mental health. So you can affect your central nervous system and impair neuron function, your brain cells. So depression, bipolar disorder, even schizophrenia, autism may be affected by an increase in inflammation. So if you can treat that chronic inflammation, and we'll get to that with turmeric, you may be able to reliably decrease those symptoms. Okay. So cytokines, the cytokine storm of this pandemic is toxic to your nervous system, and it can reduce the production of serotonin, which is your mood regulating hormone, and low levels of serotonin are a cause of depression. Okay, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are designed to keep your serotonin levels in better shape. So chronic inflammation is a long-term disorder. So inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, sarcoidosis, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, sarcoidosis, tuberculosis. I could go on and on and on. And it's also a factor in acne, fibromyalgia, obesity, and diabetes. However, not everybody that has chronic inflammation has symptoms, so it can be silent. So hypertension's known as the silent killer. It gets you when it gets you. You don't really have symptoms of hypertension until you get strokes and congestive heart failure and heart attacks, etc. So you can have chronic inflammatory disease without even realizing it. So that's, people that are diabetic and insulin resistant, or once they become insulin resistant and head towards diabetes, they don't really feel an elevated blood sugar, and they don't feel that glucose is running around rotting them from the inside. So there's some forms of arthritis, like fibromyalgia, is just, chronic fatigue. So chronic fatigue was originally felt to be due to Epstein-Barr viral infection or mononucleosis, which it can be. But it's now the chronic fatigue syndrome with the aches and pains associated with that is considered fibromyalgia. So sometimes symptoms do exist, but they're not distinct. And so that's part of the difficulty of figuring out. For instance, the most common thing I heard when I was practicing was, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So fatigue, I'm tired. So extreme fatigue, some digestive troubles. We talk about the microbiome in, I think, August or September. So later on, when you get acute symptoms from your diabetes and you start getting peripheral vascular disease and neuropathy, etc., where you get acute symptoms of pain and inflammation, treatment becomes more extensive. So the early symptoms can be pretty vague. You can't really see you're looking at a forest but can't see the trees. You've heard that before. And then blood tests are necessary. So there's inflammatory markers that you can order or find that will tell you if you have a low level inflammatory response in your body. So we talked about high sensitivity C-reactive protein. and brain natriuretic peptide yesterday for measuring inflammatory change on the heart. So food plays a key role in inflammation. So diet is can be the first remedy. So one of my friends from Texas, when we were talking about eating for health, food really is medicine, and bad food is really bad for you. So a poor diet destabilizes the body. So if you're eating simple carbohydrates and fruit sugars, added sugars, um, not enough fiber, this particular article talks about bad fats. That would be trans fats, and we haven't really talked about the difference between natural fats and trans fats for a while, so maybe that's class tomorrow or Monday. So you get an inflammatory response. So sugar does that. It inflames your body. So what you want to do is eat a balanced diet and stay away from processed foods, right? It's basically best to avoid sugar and especially high fructose corn syrup. And I should probably do a class on how to read a food label because now they're hiding high fructose corn syrup in the way that they label food products. Hey, Shelley. Um, all right. So chronic inflammation ages you faster. It's premature aging. So chronic inflammation causes premature aging. So much so that a new word has been coined, and it's called inflammaging. So it declines your overall body function. So in my physiology and anatomy class, at the end of each chapter or whatever system we're talking about, the very last page before the embryology is the effects of aging on whatever particular system we're talking about in that particular class and chapter. So the anatomy course this morning we do at 10:30. We're talking about the urinary system, and we talk about what happens to the urinary system at the end of that chapter as we get older. Okay, so particularly chronic inflammation prematurely ages you through insulin resistance, diabetes, age-related macular degeneration. It affects the skin. It reduces cell renewal, results in slackening of skin tissue and wrinkles, less collagen, etc., etc. That's the end of every chapter in my anatomy and physiology course is what's the effect of aging. Okay, does exercise play a role? Yes. If you are not, and it doesn't have to be running the Boston Marathon or bench pressing 350 pounds, it's just basically moving. Your phone has an app on it. If you have an iPhone, there's a little heart app. And then I've connected that to a scale I got from a company called Withings, where I can weigh myself and it counts steps, and I put my blood pressure in. I got kind of the middle of the road Bluetooth hooks to your router scale. I'll put up a link to it later. It's kind of cool. It's not a cheap scale. It's $99, but it's kind of cool. It works with your phone. It has an app. It'll count your phone will count your steps. So technically, you want 10,000 steps. I can always tell when I'm teaching at the high school because I get pretty close. I get about 8,500 steps in at the high school. So moving. So pretty much 20 to 30 minutes a day you get some exercise anti-inflammatory effects. So a brisk walk counts. And I walk fast. Everybody that walks with me gets if they don't walk as fast or as well, they get irritated because I get so far ahead of them. Probably from running to labor and delivery and running down ERs and ORs and all that over the years. But I've walked fast my whole life. So brisk walking counts. Obesity is an inflammatory disease. So there's a connection between chronic inflammation. When people say, well, I was normal weight, I haven't changed my diet. When I turned 40, I started gaining weight. That's kind of normal. So, past 40, about 10 pounds every decade. So you don't want to start out when you're 39 way overweight because you're going to gain some weight That also plays into hormone balance, which we've talked about many times about hormone balance in the Shining protocol that I used. So obesity promotes chronic inflammation, but chronic inflammation promotes obesity. So basically, sugar intolerance, insulin resistance is rampant if you start gaining weight and hit that BMI scale of 30, where the New York Life Insurance Company says that you're obese. Okay, so if you're not able to use insulin correctly, or if you're resistant, your blood sugar levels skyrocket, and like I said, sugar rots you from the inside out. Okay, and then excessive food intake exhausts your metabolism. So if you're eating carbohydrates because you're going to be using them for energy, that's okay. But if you eat too much carbohydrates and you don't need it for the immediate energy, you're going to store that sugar in your muscles and liver, and then fats, so it's transformed into fat and put in adipocytes in your body. So those cells increase inflammatory response. We talked about white fat and brown fat in May. The only people that have really good brown fat are babies, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to limit the amount of white fat we get, because white fat is inflammatory. Okay, so there's natural solutions. So we're going to get into turmeric. This is the one I'm talking about today. It's not the only one. I've got several supplements that I take. Turmeric is one of them. And I actually learned something about my turmeric supplement by doing research on this. So here's the top 10 evidence-based. This is from Science. I've got articles for all this. So turmeric, or also curcumin, which is the active ingredient, contains bioactive compounds. So turmeric is a spice that gives curry its yellow color. It's been used in India for thousands of years as a medicinal herb, as well as a spice. So you can get it as a spice. You've seen it. The problem is you would have to eat so much of the turmeric that you put in your food that you wouldn't be able to stand it. So most people, if they need turmeric and if they need the inflammatory properties, have to take a supplement. Okay, so the compounds are called curcuminoids, the most important which is curcumin. It's the main active ingredient. It's powerful anti-inflammatory. It's the most studied anti-inflammatory supplement in the history of the world. Okay, so the curcumin content of turmeric is about 3% by weight. So most of the studies using turmeric extracts that contain mostly curcumin are dosages that exceed a gram per day. Okay, so it would be very difficult to do that just with a spice. So the problem is curcumin is poorly absorbed into the bloodstream, and so most of the time, if you consume it with black pepper or a high-fat meal, it enhances the absorption of curcumin by 2,000%. So if you're taking your curcumin, make sure that around the time you take it, you have some black pepper. I'm not saying shake the pepper in your mouth, but pepper your food if you're taking your supplement. So the best supplements of curcumin contain piperine. So piperine is in black pepper, and it's a natural substance that enhances the absorption of curcumin. Curcumin is also fat soluble, so if you eat a fatty meal, you absorb your curcumin better. So inflammation is important, like we just talked about. So without inflammatory responses, bacteria could just invade your body and take over, right? So short-term inflammation is beneficial. Chronic low-level inflammation is playing the role in most of the chronic Western diseases that afflict the United States. So heart disease, cancer, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's, degenerative conditions. So anything that can fight chronic inflammation is helpful, hopefully, in preventing and maybe even treating these diseases. Of course, the FDA is not going to let anybody say that curcumin treats anything. It's a supplement and it's not regulated for prescriptions, right? So it's curcumin is a strongly anti-inflammatory plant. So it matches the effectiveness of some anti-inflammatory drugs like Advil, Motrin, ibuprofen, but no side effects, unless you just don't like the taste in your food. But if you're taking a supplement, the supplement I take is in a capsule form, so it doesn't, I have no side effects from taking it. Okay? And so what it does is blocks a molecule called NF-KB that travels into the nucleus of your cells and turns on the genes that are related to inflammation. So it blocks that. Okay, so inflammation is is complicated, but the key takeaway, and you don't really need to look up NF-KB unless you want to do physiology with me, is that curcumin is bioactive and it fights inflammation at the molecular level. Okay, so turmeric and curcumin dramatically increase the antioxidant capacity of your body. So this is oxygen-free, reactive oxygen species and free radicals, so oxidative damage, which is a normal process in your mitochondria to produce ATP, which is the energy generating part of your cell, creates oxygen reactive species and free radicals. So if your glutathione levels are low, or coenzyme Q10 levels are low, then you're producing free radicals that need to be scavenged. So the whole point of taking glutathione and CoQ10 and curcumin is to fight off that oxidative stress, which is a normal part of metabolism. So they react, so if they get around, they react, or if they build up, they react with important organic substances such as fatty acids and proteins, and they react with your DNA. So what you want is antioxidants. Vitamin C is one, vitamin E is one, CoQ10 is one, black cumin oil is one, curcumin is one, glutathione one. But what curcumin does is it gives you a 1-2 punch against free radicals. So it blocks their formation or their entry into the cell nucleus, and then stimulates your body's own antioxidant effects and mechanisms and defenses. Okay, so number 4, curcumin also boosts brain-derived neurotrophic factor that improves brain function and has a lower risk of brain disease. So we used to think that neurons weren't able to divide at all or multiply after you were a certain age, in childhood. But that is not true. Neurons are capable of forming new connections, and in certain areas of your brain they actually multiply and increase in number. Okay, and one of the processes that drives that is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a growth hormone that functions in your brain. So a lot of common brain disorders have been linked to decreases in levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which includes Alzheimer's, dementia, and depression. So interestingly enough, curcumin actually increases brain levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so by doing this, it may be effective in delaying, potentially even reversing some age-related diseases and brain function. It seems to make you improve your memory, which is involved with your hippocampus, and we talk in physiology about taking short-term memory and turning that into long-term memory, which happens while you're sleeping. So people who have difficulty sleeping through the night or having their 7.5 hours of uninterrupted sleep, their memory function isn't as good. So sleep is important for forming long-term memories. Okay, curcumin may be able to lower your risk of heart disease. So it's the #1 cause of death in the world. The last 2 classes had to do with particle size of lipoproteins and ratios and how to calculate your risk of future heart disease. So it's complicated. That's not the only thing involved, and inflammation is the major factor for the development of heart disease. So it may be that curcumin can reverse some of the steps in that heart disease formation process. So the main benefit seems to be improvement in endothelial function. That's what lines your blood vessels. It's only 1 cell layer thick. And like we talked about, those small dense LDL particles can get underneath that layer and set up an immune response, which then causes chronic inflammation and plaque formation. The other thing that is good for endothelial function is nitric oxide, and that falls off the map about the time you turn 40. So you've seen me drinking nitric oxide on camera at one of the classes. Um, so there are ways to. It's hard to get nitric oxide levels up from oral distribution, but there's ways to do it. Um, and nitric oxide with curcumin together improve endothelial cell functions. Okay. It's as effective as exercise. So if you don't really like exercising, even though I'm saying brisk walking is technically an exercise, it's been shown that curcumin is as effective in improving endothelial function as exercise, and it's been compared to atorvastatin, and it's as effective as atorvastatin. Um, and we've talked about statins and their inability to reduce cardiac mortality, so it won't save your life. But there is some evidence that statins may decrease your level or your risk of development of heart disease. Problem is it blocks coenzyme Q10 as well. Okay, turmeric can help prevent cancer. Okay, so cancer's an uncontrolled cell growth. It takes over your body, a bunch of different kind of cancers, of course, and curcumin has been studied and maybe in the future become part of the treatment protocol for people who have cancer. So it affects cancer growth, development, and spread at the molecular level. So it can contribute to apoptosis, or death of cancerous cells, and reduce angiogenesis, which is growth of new blood vessels and tumors, as well as metastasis, which is spread of cancer. So cancers have to make new blood vessels to continue to grow, and curcumin seems to reduce their ability to do that, increase the death of cancer cells, and decrease the spread of cancer cells. So this is laboratories and animals. And there's some evidence it may prevent cancer from occurring in the first place, especially digestive system cancers like colorectal cancer, which I think is number 3. So in a 30-day study, 44% of men with lesions in the colon that were precancerous, 4 grams, that's a big whopping dose of curcumin, reduced the number of lesions by 40%. So that's just after 30 days. 4 grams of curcumin for 30 days. Okay. May be useful in preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease. So it's a leading cause of dementia. It's the most common neurodegenerative disease in the world. There is no treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So prevention would be interesting. We'll do a class on human growth hormone releasing hormone and its effects on reduction in neurodegenerative disease and improved mental clarity and memory. Maybe next week. I keep saying I'm going to do it, and I come up with something else to talk about. So curcumin crosses the blood-brain barrier. A lot of medications don't, and so you have to kind of fool around with dosing and pharmacokinetics and half-lives and all that. So there is a blood-brain barrier that is formed by astrocytes, which are glial cells in your brain, and that's one of the big functions of astrocytes is to keep nasty things out of your brain circulation. Curcumin, however, is not one of them, and that's good because it's good for your brain. So inflammation and oxidative damage play a role in Alzheimer's disease. So curcumin seems to have a benefit on both of those processes, oxidative damage and inflammation. And then in Alzheimer's is a buildup of protein tangles. They're called amyloid plaques, and curcumin has been shown scientifically to help clear those plaques. Okay? Okay, people with arthritis. Now notice I've talked about inflammation and we've talked about some inflammatory things, but curcumin has all these other health benefits other than arthritis and inflammation. So arthritis is common, several different types, one of which is, several of which are actually autoimmune in how they form, like rheumatoid arthritis. The most common is osteoarthritis, and so why people get hip replacements and knee replacements. So it appears, since curcumin is such a potent anti-inflammatory, that it helps with arthritic pain. um, and in a study with people who had rheumatoid arthritis pain, curcumin head-to-head with a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug was more effective than the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. Okay, and then there's some benefits against depression. Okay, so in a control group, people with depression randomized into three groups. One group took Prozac, okay, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, also known as fluoxetine is the generic. Another group took 1 gram of curcumin, and the third group took both Prozac and curcumin. And after 6 weeks, curcumin had led to improvements in depressive symptoms that were similar to Prozac. The best result was those that took Prozac and curcumin. But I was always taught in medical school and residency that depression was kind of an acute event, and so an antidepressant should only be necessary for about 3 months. And you see people that have been taking Paxil and Prozac and Zoloft and all that for years and years and years. But what if they took curcumin at 1 gram a day and got off those SSRIs? Because there are side effects like fatigue and sexual dysfunction, etc. So ideally, getting off those meds would be helpful, and curcumin might be the way to do it. Okay, may help delay aging and fight age-related chronic diseases as well. So it's become a very popular anti-aging supplement for longevity. And so since oxidative stress and inflammation of a chronic variety plays a role in aging, it may be that curcumin itself is an anti-aging supplement overall. Hey Ross. So that's my little, how far into this are we? 31-minute little class on inflammation, the good and the bad, as well as curcumin and the 10 health benefits. I talked about anti-inflammation, so I guess 9 others other than anti-inflammatory properties. So look for a supplement that has pepperine in it, which is an active ingredient of black pepper. It's also absorbed better with around a fatty meal, so you kind of pay attention when you take it. I'm at the 800 milligram dose twice a day, so I take 1.6 grams a day, and you don't feel it, but I don't, I take all these supplements, I don't get sick, I don't hurt. I think I had a headache for the first time 2 days ago, for the first time in several years. I never get the flu. I haven't really changed a whole lot what I do. I wear masks in places where people are congregating and all that. And I go to a high school, so I'm around petri dishes of kids 2 or 3 days a week. So I'm kind of convinced that my supplement regimen, one of which is turmeric, helps me quite a bit. So that's it. It's a cold morning. I've got to hop off of here and prep for anatomy at 10:30, and I will, if I don't get called into the high school tomorrow, we'll do class tomorrow at 9:30. Maybe I'll do the human growth hormone releasing hormone class, so you can see what that's about. So have a great day. See you later, and bye.